Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's the November 28th Board of Waterworks Trustees meeting, and we have some very good news as we start off, and that is I would like to introduce our newest board member, who was just appointed a week and a day ago by Mayor County, Diane Moines, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to all of you.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm really interested in this topic. I spent most of my career as a regulator at the Iowa Utilities Board, and we had one water company that we regulated, which was Iowa American in Davenport and Clinton, so I have a little bit of familiarity. I worked there quite a while. I worked at the Edison Electric Institute in D.C. for a couple years. I came back and worked for Mid-American in energy efficiency, and again had some dealings with the waterworks as you took advantage of the programs that Mid-American had. I have, for the last couple years, worked with the Environmental Defense Fund in their clean energy program, clean energy and climate change, and working towards making the changes that we need to make as a passion of mine. I lived in Des Moines since 1975. I'm married. I have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. And my daughter is moving back to Des Moines. I'm so excited.
Oh, wonderful. Well, the only bad news about this is we now have more attorneys at this table than we have regular folks with Diane's addition. So.
Sue, are you married to a judge, or is it just...
So anyway, with that, we have a very detailed agenda. We have some exciting things that we want to talk about, and when we get into the committee information, I do want to note we extended an invitation to the Register as well as to our partners at Urbandale and West Des Moines, because we want this process, we've said this all along, to be very transparent as we talk about a regional utility. And so I want to have some discussions now that we have a full board. Thank you, Mayor. And so we want to do that today. We are about 30 days away from hopefully having a final report from Jason Mum from FCS. And so although I do enjoy attending the meetings, I feel like I'm representing all of you. And I want to make sure I know where our board stands regarding our regional opportunities and options we have. So we will get to that when we come down to the board committee reports. But with that, we have a consent agenda. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
Sue, may I ask the board's approval to strike an item here that now becomes redundant? I believe it's under information items under Roman numeral 4. B, DMWW Board considerations involving regional rate making. I believe that's going to be covered under the committee reports for the Customer Relations Committee. I think that staff was redundant in adding that at this point. So if the board would entertain removing that from the informational items.
Do you want to, the other option would be you could keep our discussion under that, and that would allow people that were here just to hear that part to leave earlier.
But it's actually under, yeah, I think it's a draw. It's a draw.
But you know what I mean? If we could do it as a second item as opposed to the last item. Is all I'm saying. We could do it. It's chair's choice, but.
I don't know that that's going to really save us additional time.
Okay, whatever.
Unless we do want to move the discussion, because we do have a few people here interested in the Customer Relations Committee report, and we could certainly move that up. Counselor, do you have a problem with that?
I would not have a problem with moving it up.
Is that all right with everyone? Okay, let's do that, because we have at least 3 individuals in the room that I know are primarily sticking around for that issue.
Perhaps complete the consent agenda first.
Right.
We will do that.
And you can all thank me later.
So we have a motion, a friendly amendment to strike B and then a chair's prerogative to move item A first dot up. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So with that, I do want to ask first on the public comment period, do we have anyone here from the public interested in making a comment? Okay, with that then, we're going to jump ahead to informational items number 4. And this is under Customer Relations Committee. We have had numerous meetings and hours of meetings with our regional counterparts discussing the idea of regionalization. I think we all know the benefits to it, particularly for our ratepayers here in the city of Des Moines. But I want to have a broader conversation. I do very much want to recognize that I appreciate all of the work the staff has done, as Jason has come to them asking for various models, financial information, asset calculations, etc., and also to Graham Gillette, who is on the Customer Relations Committee, and that's where we've really assigned the whole regionalization as we go through this. But the reason we're calling it Customer Relations is because we think on an ongoing basis we want to have additional discussions regarding customer relations. So with that, Amy, I think you are first up to kick off this.
Don't panic, Michelle. I'll give you your presentation back.
And if I may kind of cue up Amy's remarks, I think she's going to pull up a PowerPoint that's going to be helpful. And I know the board in particular, and certainly folks in the audience, but the board in particular has been familiar with discussions that have been going on for months now. You'll recall that there were 4 guiding principles. One of the guiding principles involving no change of asset ownership. As a practical matter, there's now discussion that is essentially questioning whether that's an appropriate guiding principle, and so the staff recommendation here to help to move the discussion forward really aligns with the idea that asset transfer is appropriate. Essentially, ultimately, the discussion is bifurcating into 2 areas. One of them is transfer of assets. The other is, without transferring assets, is there something that can be done, presumably under state law, to essentially enlarge a regional board or to create a regional board that would have suburban and Des Moines representation. The staff recommendation, as you're going to hear from Amy and myself, more from Amy, will be, in fact, to move towards asset transfer. But I think it's important to look towards some basic premises that are kind of coloring our analysis as staff. One of them is, again, this notion of creating a regional board. It would be in addition to the Waterworks Board, the West Des Moines Waterworks Board, and the Urbandale Water Utility Board. That is, that there would be a 4th board, if you will, out there that would have regional production responsibilities. Another premise from our analysis is all assets are in. This is not just about Des Moines, it's about West Des Moines that has production assets, Altoona and Polk City that also have production assets. And certainly we are going to want to work at some point with legal staff, particularly legal staff that is working with the 6 mayors to ensure that privatization and some kind of hold harmless a series of provisions are in place to protect Des Moines ratepayers in the long run from the risks of privatization and other risks as we see them. Again, the independent boards would remain, and there would be essentially operating contracts with each of the production entities, that is the Water Board in West Des Moines, the Water Board here in Des Moines, and the city councils in Altoona and Polk City to make that work. When we get into the other basic premises, I think more of that will make sense as Amy walks through some of her analysis here. But I do believe that the fork in the road that the discussions have taken us toward now is either asset transfer involving the regional production, and certainly there are those who would say it only is Des Moines assets that would transfer in that circumstance, something that staff does not view as being in our best interests. but all production assets being part of this process throughout the region. The other fork that does not involve asset transfer, again, is a notion that I think you'll hear some more from, involving essentially expanding a water board, creating a fourth water board without transfer of assets, very forward-looking at new regional assets as they come on board. But with that in mind, Amy will give you a little bit different view here from a financial perspective if assets were to transfer, how that could work from a valuation standpoint. All yours, Ms. Kaylee.
Okay, thank you, Bill, for setting that up. Just a few more foundational concepts, I think, that will help as we kind of navigate this recommendation. The regional board would govern really all operations of a regional production utility. That includes operation and maintenance costs. They would be the regional board would oversee those costs. And in return, a couple down, they would establish a unified wholesale rate that they would then charge all customers of the regional system. Another component that would be included in the rate is CIP, capital improvements, and the regional board would be responsible for all capital investment decisions, what projects are prioritized and when they are prioritized, what facilities are expanded or improved upon, when new facilities are constructed, many of the same decisions that this board makes related to capital, because the regional board would own the assets, that accountability would transfer to the regional board. Two very important concepts, I think, in order for the rest of what I'm going to say to make any sense, are those bottom two foundational premises. Purchased capacity would be erased. And purchased capacity, as you recall, is an upfront investment that our wholesale customers made in our core network, kind of the skeleton that provides production for everyone, all of our customers. The wholesale customers made this upfront investment in return for a lower rate over the contract period of 40 years. That contract, you might recall, was signed or executed in 2005, and it expires in 2045. So essentially, this foundation would say we extinguish purchase capacity as of the date that the assets would transfer.
Amy, can I interrupt
Please.
on that issue? Just to make clear to you as board members, the purchase capacity agreements, the master purchase capacity agreement, Rick and our legal staff certainly were involved in drafting that in a way that indicates that the parties entering into that did not receive any ownership interest in either the Saylorville or Maffitt facilities. So this process that we're recommending going forward certainly goes beyond what our legal rights and responsibilities are, in our view, to monetize, if you would accept that term, to provide some kind of asset anchor or asset ownership well beyond what was agreed by the parties. I just want you to have a sense of that. The master agreement, the purchase capacity agreements, are essentially an option, nothing more from a legal standpoint, in my view. We're taking that a step beyond that in our recommendation to you and translating it into an ownership interest, at least for purposes of our discussion today.
And Amy, if I could also add something, I want to make sure that we set the expectation or understanding that this is not information that has been presented to the regional group that has been meeting. We have been having parallel conversations within our committee, and these are simply ideas. These are kind of taking some of those thoughts and expanding them at a deeper level, since the majority of the assets are owned by Des Moines Water Works, and we need to really make sure that we understand the impact to us. So this is not information that, these Wednesday morning meetings and then the 2-hour workshops have been explored. But should we come away from this with a strong feeling from this board as to one, we could certainly serve it up as an idea or option to the regional entity. So just to make sure everyone understands that.
Good clarification. Many of you recall that this has been studied before by Serdwick. Regionalization has. In 2014, Black and Veatch issued a report. And this path is a little bit different from that report in that Black and Veatch attempted to value assets that would become regional. And this path really values something else beyond bricks and mortar assets in lieu of bricks and mortar assets. It is valuing capacity, production capacity, which is an owner's equity component. There's value to that excess capacity. And so this is where I'm going to take a deeper dive because that's a little hard to grasp. That purchase capacity, production capacity rather, is considered equity to be valued. So just bear with me. I want to explain really what that means. All right. So I think that in order to understand production capacity, we need to understand at least two components of it. Subscribed capacity is the first. And really, these terms, I want to be sure I take no credit for them. They actually came from Jason Mom, who is our facilitator, and I think they added clarity. Subscribed capacity is capacity that's already used to provide water to existing customers. Reserve capacity is any unused capacity. It's part of the owner's equity that this exercise, if this path is chosen, will be valued. So I have an illustration here, and I apologize. That font is a little hard to read, but just to put numbers to this, the total core network capacity is 105 million gallons a day. That is considering our 3 treatment plants. And that does not include what we call the nameplate capacity of each plant. It's 105, 75 from Fluor, 22.5 from McMullen, and 7.5 from Saylorville. From that total production capacity, we have sold about 54 million gallons a day in purchase capacity to our wholesale customers. That capacity available for Des Moines and total service then is 51 million gallons a day. And I want to point out here that when I talk about Des Moines, I'm also talking about our total service customers. Those are communities like Pleasant Hill, Windsor Heights, Cumming, those communities who have contracted with us to provide all of their water operations. We oversee their system, we set their rates, etc. They are part of the Des Moines Waterworks family in these scenarios. The peak that Des Moines and total service customers have used is that subscribed capacity, 41 million gallons. That was used in 2012. That was our peak year, you might recall. So the reserve capacity in Des Moines Waterworks system is 10 million gallons per day. Okay. So Des Moines Waterworks has 10 million gallons a day of reserve capacity that would be trued up in any asset transfer, meaning Des Moines Waterworks would presumably be compensated for this reserve capacity. That would be an important part of the transaction. What this effectively means is Des Moines customers have been carrying that reserve capacity that's available. So there would need to be some consideration exchanged in order for that reserve capacity to be considered the regional production. Is everyone hanging with me so far? Okay. There is also, however, reserve capacity in purchased capacity. Again, this is the amount that wholesale customers have purchased in the core network. Some wholesale customers have excess purchase capacity beyond what they have ever used. So these entities also have reserve capacity for which they would be compensated. I have an example here, and I think Urbandale is a great example. In 2005, Urbandale purchased 15.3 million gallons a day. They had a very long-term look when they purchased capacity because to date, they have only used, on their peak day lifetime from the core network, they've only used 11.2 million gallons a day. So where we sit today, they have excess capacity that they've purchased, or what we're coining reserve capacity, of about 4 million gallons a day. So similarly to Des Moines Waterworks would need to be compensated for their reserve capacity, Urbandale also has reserve capacity.
But to be clear, in that scenario, was that Urbandale that you were showing?
Yes.
Urbandale pays for the water they use. They don't pay for their capacity.
They pay for the water they use, and they purchase
The ability to
capacity
purchase more.
at a lower rate.
So today, Des Moines must preserve its units so we can meet that capacity, right? We have to be prepared to provide them all the capacity that
That they've purchased. That's correct.
And that's on Des Moines. But they only pay for what they receive.
That's correct.
And to be
What they
clear,
demand.
there are really two parts in that transaction that I think are important to recognize. They paid a significant amount of money up front, a lump sum to purchase an option to buy at a lower rate. Then they actually are charged essentially $2 per thousand in addition to that, Graham. So you're correct, they're only paying, in this case, $2 per thousand for 11.2 million gallons a day, but they've also paid a significant amount of money up front
But is it,
for the benefit of that
I understand.
lower rate.
So is it fair to say that, there's a cost to provide 15.3 million gallons, right?
Oh,
There's a cost. Part of that cost was borne by Urbandale when they purchased that, and part of that cost is being borne by Des Moines until we sell that capacity.
That, I think, is arguable because the 10 reserve that you saw earlier recognizes the full costs associated with 15.3 going to Urbandale, Graham. So we are not apportioning a piece of that 10 MGD to reach the 15.3.
I'll come back to that. I don't want to go off track.
There's
Come
one
back.
other complexity, which is that some of the purchase capacity was financed through the issuance of bonds that have not yet been paid off. I think they're near being paid off. And some of the purchase capacity didn't pay up front, but rather pay as the bonds become due. And if I could add to the picture here just a little bit, Des Moines Waterworks has pledged revenues to support $29 million in revenue bonds. They're outstanding, and any plan that deals with any sort of asset transfer is going to have to take into account the bonded indebtedness.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's helpful.
just to be clear, and I won't spend a lot of time on, but Rick's concern of defeasement is very real in this kind of circumstance. That is, there's indebtedness to a third-party creditor here, that there are certain restrictions on how that indebtedness is extinguished. It isn't quite as easy as being able to move the obligation from person A to person B. But that's a complexity that we'll face in the event we go forward with having to do with defeasement, that is extinguishing the indebtedness.
It is a hurdle, and debt has not been considered in any of these illustrations. So, as Bill said, that's a complexity that would need to be addressed.
And to be clear, some of the communities have taken their indebtedness independently, and some of them have done it through Des Moines Waterworks. So it really does go to your issue, Graham, of have we, through our revenue capabilities, underwritten a portion of this? Yes, but not all of it. Sorry.
No, please. So we do have, though, communities who are in an opposite situation where there's what I've coined negative reserve capacity. A few wholesale customers have used more capacity on their lifetime peak day than they purchased up front, than they purchased in options. So this is what I'm calling negative reserve capacity, and it's additional capacity that an entity would need to purchase to meet their peak demand on the system at the time that any asset transfer would occur. So I've used West Des Moines Waterworks here as an example to illustrate this. West Des Moines Waterworks has purchased around 9 million gallons a day, a little less than that. They have used on their lifetime peak from the core network 10.5 million gallons. So West Des Moines Waterworks has negative reserve capacity of 1.5 million. They've put more demand on the system than they had options, which is allowed in the Wholesale Master Water Service Agreement. But at the time that we are trying to equalize this capacity equity, this would need to be addressed, the fact that they have used more. In addition, some wholesale customers, West Des Moines being one of them, have their own treatment plants, their own production that would be included in regional production. And those systems may have their own reserve capacity that should be considered. I've shown 3 of our other producers in the metro area here. These numbers are used for illustration only. So Altoona, they have about 4 million gallons a day out of their plants. And if we assume that their own demand on their system is 3 million gallons, that means Altoona has 1 million gallons a day of reserve capacity in their own system. Polk City pretty much uses all the capacity available in their treatment plant. And West Des Moines Water Works, again, using assumptions only, in this illustration, we've indicated that they have about 2 million gallons a day in reserve capacity. And the reason that's important is because, again, if we're all in this regionally, that reserve capacity from those production facilities would also need to be factored in. So what this all boils down to, and this is a formula, but I hope it's not too intimidating. This is really the heavy lift. So what we do by entity is we take the reserve capacity in Des Moines Water Works purchase capacity in that core network. Remember, some will have positive reserve capacity. Others, like West Des Moines, the illustration I showed, will have negative reserve capacity. It could go either way. We add the reserve capacity in each entity's own production if they have any. This is where we look at Altoona, West Des Moines, and Polk City, and what do they bring to the regional table. And that altogether equals each entity's total reserve capacity. The really heavy lift here, and we don't know, but we multiply that reserve capacity times some uniform dollar value per gallon. And that's what all parties would have to agree to. What is that number? I can't stand before you today and tell you what that is. So we were trying to get to the value of reserve capacity. If that dollar amount is positive, then the entity would receive money. If that is negative, the entity would end up paying money in order to participate in the regional effort.
Can I stop there for a minute? Receive and pay money is a bit of an overstatement in the sense that it may be a credit for future receipt. As an example, if in this process Des Moines Water Works has a credit of X million dollars, that does not mean on day one of this agreement necessarily Des Moines Water Works will receive that amount of cash. It may be indebtedness, it may be rate reductions for future water sold. There are a lot of ways that can be packaged.
And then the last thing, remember when I said, this is one of the earlier slides, Des Moines has 10 MGD reserve capacity, that would be trued up. The value of this 10 MGD attributed to Des Moines Water Works could range anywhere from around 30 million to 100 million. Again, that all comes really in the value that is agreed upon by all the parties in order to value that reserve capacity.
For just a minute, the 100 million comes from Black and Deep.
Mm-hmm.
The 30 million is certainly the low end in our view, but one of the concepts that Jason has, I think, effectively introduced also to our discussions is like any utility, the idea of fair market value is a little bit illusory. There isn't a buyer and seller readily available that's fully informed. We're not selling bushels of corn here. We're selling bricks and mortars, or at least production capacity, if you will. So it becomes a lot more illusory as to what the market is. There's probably a fair value that ultimately is a negotiated value among the parties. So I think that gives you a sense. We have one more slide that just has our logo on it, I think.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
I was going to spare you.
Exhaustive slides. Again, we think you're at a point, based on the discussions, of at least beginning to assess 2 different avenues. One of them is asset transfer, and this is our recommended approach as to asset transfer. The other would be not an asset transfer, but a suggestion or an idea that Gary Lawrence, the mayor of Ankeny, has raised on several occasions, and that's essentially some creation of a 4th board that would not involve transfer of assets, but would involve essentially co-jurisdiction between that new board and the existing water boards.
Can we try to answer any questions you may have on
At least this concept, I think the second route here will be explained to you a little bit by members of the board. But we've been asked to provide a staff view and a recommendation based on those two avenues, and this is certainly our recommendation as to asset transfer.
Bill, can I ask a question? Just
Absolutely.
from a lawyer's perspective, if I may. The asset we're talking about is this defined idea of reserve capacity. What's the nature of the instrument or contract or thing that transfers that from whom, I guess from Des Moines Waterworks would be the 10 million gallons per day, to the new regional entity? Is this just a kind of a virtual transfer or a...
I think the devil's in the details, Rick, meaning that first of all, the transfer here would involve far more than the 10 million gallons of reserve capacity. Let me use an example that you and I are going to be familiar with, and most of the folks in the audience will be familiar with. Johnston. Johnston has no purchase capacity. So this process essentially would require them to purchase enough to meet their peak, meaning that there's going to be a number of transfers involved in this, whether it's by 28E, 28F, or by some other instrument, I guess remains to be seen. But there is complexity in that, as your question hints toward, and how that could work and would work, I think, is fairly complicated in the sense that it isn't just a transfer of 10 million gallons. We are essentially taking purchase capacity, monetizing it in some reserve capacity that's based on the peak of each community, recognizing some communities, like Johnston, would have to purchase a great deal of this reserve capacity, and there are other communities that are total service communities under the Des Moines umbrella, where probably there's no transaction necessary, but certainly there has to be agreement among the parties there, the total service customers and us, if there's some change in the existing contractual relationship under the total service agreement.
Could we understand this as a kind of a restructuring of our existing wholesale purchase capacity agreement?
Yes,
For instance?
because it zeroes it out essentially and converts it to a different sense of entitlement, if you will.
Okay.
Just
But
one idea.
Please, go on.
But it doesn't contemplate the transfer of an asset that is currently titled in the name of the city of Des Moines for the use and benefit of the Board of Waterworks trustees.
I think that realistically that issue hasn't been plumbed entirely. I would imagine that some of the communities that are part of these discussions would want that to happen. How that could happen and deal with complexities, as an example, like the gallery system, which are interwoven with a City of Des Moines titled park, as an example. I assume we would have to deal with easements involving those facilities. There's a lot of complexity in this, Rick, but ultimately, could it involve the Saylorville Water Treatment Plant being retitled to Central Iowa Water Works, or whatever this fourth entity would be constructed toward? Yes, I think that certainly will be an item that would be discussed. How that could happen and whether it could happen is a bit like defeasement. I think there's a lot of issues there to touch on.
Okay.
Graham?
In discussing this, and when you look at this concept of the, how do I move this from one to the next?
Just the arrows.
Just the arrows. The concept of the asset transfer is complicated. As you can see, there are so many. Diane, you can look at the looks on Diane's face. I feel it's complicated. I mean, there are a lot of moving pieces here and unknowns. Our ability to transfer these assets without, negotiating with the city, the possibility that we might have to have a referendum. There's a lot of unknowns there. That's before you even get into the point of how do we value these assets. And I bet that we probably get to a point where some of us in Des Moines think that those assets are undervalued and people other are overvalued. And then you get into how you're actually going to pay for these, whether you're writing a check up front or whether there's future returns and reductions for Des Moines and rates. All of those complexities, in my opinion, create these or place these hurdles along the track that we don't need to have. They create some places where the negotiations that we've been having, these productive discussions we've been having, could break down. So what I'm going to offer is an alternative that hopefully begins to remove some of those obstacles from the field and allows us to find a path of least resistance, one that allows us to continue to have these negotiations without having to think about dollars and think about some of these other things. So let me, if I can get my computer and try to do this, and I'll get this. I put this together this afternoon, so if it's a little jumbled, I apologize. But fair, transparent, and mutual, that's something that I'm going to hit on. And forgive me, but I'm going to give 90 seconds of history, because that allows me to show where we're going. Most of you know this. In 1871, precursor Des Moines Water Works was formed as a private company. In 1911, voters approved a ballot issue. That utility that was once a private utility became a department of the city of Des Moines. By 1923, the Iowa General Assembly thought better, and they transferred the utility governance to an independent 5-member board, this board. They did that mainly, going back and reading, because they didn't want the city of Des Moines using this utility, the revenue from this utility to supplement the city budget. They wanted an independent board. And so for 94 years, this board has operated that way. Beyond that, and over that time, Des Moines Water Works has expanded its full-service area to include other areas, full-service customers such as the City of Windsor Heights and Polk County and others. And, as we've discussed here today, we have numerous wholesale customers such as the City of Clive, West Des Moines, and others. So I say all that to say that Des Moines Water Works operates as the utility, as the regional provider of water. But we've come to the realization that we can't do this alone, that it's in the best interest of this region for all of us to work and plan together. As this region and this population of this region grows, cities and communities will continue to explore economic development opportunities. We have to work together to manage the natural resource of water and to plan and set things such as rates and others, and in essence, to govern as a regional utility. So how do we get there? Right? This is the hard part. Amy mentioned the Black and Veatch study. It was about 2014, if memory serves me right. The Black and Veatch study did an evaluation of those water production assets in this region. Kind of an idea not only to determine what was out there in the capacity, but also to put some dollar amounts on that. We'll argue about those dollar amounts until we're all blue in the face. Again, we may say they're too low and others would say they're too high, but at least that was a starting point. And really, what this began to show us is that concept of Des Moines and other producers of water, West Des Moines, whoever owns sites, Urbandale owns a potential site for water, that transfer of dollars to pay for those assets, the devil really is in the dollars, right? I mean, it's hard for us to figure out what they're worth, and it's hard for us to figure out how others are going to pay for it. As I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, my fear is that if we begin to talk about those dollars, these negotiations that have been productive up to this point begin to fall apart. So, relying back on where I started this, Des Moines Water Works is in the good position we're not a private company where we have to return an investment to our stockholders. We're not a department of the city that's looking to fund its operations. So we're truly a public utility that's owned by the people of Des Moines. We entered into the discussions with the region with that guiding principle that we wouldn't transfer assets because it's unnecessary to transfer assets. We're not seeking money today because we think it's in the best interest of the people of Des Moines to operate as a public utility for the region. And we have to figure out how to do that, and that's what I'm going to get into next. See if I missed anything on that. And just to put maybe too fine a point on it, I think that it's problematic for us to try to figure out how to price this and then put that burden on other communities to reimburse us, whether it's reimburse us with a check up front or reimburse us through reduced rates going forward. But that concept of getting away from purchase capacity to some sort of unified rate as a region where we plan for the future should be the continued goal. All right. So here's where we get in how do we do this. The main assertion I'm going to make is that we can achieve the primary objectives of regionalization without transferring assets. And I might suggest that the exercise of traveling that road, that Black and Beach Road again, actually should help us understand why we don't want to go down that road. It's so difficult and it's cumbersome. As I mentioned, we're not a private company. We don't have to satisfy our investors. The people of Des Moines, if we were to do that, to conduct a transfer of assets and receive that, the benefit to the people of Des Moines would be marginal. And I would go on that the benefit to people throughout the region would be marginal or even negative. If you just think for a moment, if money has to be raised to compensate those who have production assets or excess capacity or however we do that, the end of the day, rates are going to be higher through an asset transfer than they would be if we found another way to govern regionally. And so the concept here that I propose is that the ownership of these assets, the ones that Rick was outlining and how we figured out, would remain with Des Moines. But how do we get to all of those important points that we realize as a board is important to the region and that our partners in the region seek and demand, and rightfully so. So let's look at those. I believe this board is committed to establishing mechanisms, and I put mechanisms because there's more than one, to provide a way for the people of this region to participate and have a voice in these three things. And participation and a voice are key here. The number one objective is that we manage the natural resource of water. That is, that going forward, we make decisions as a region collectively. Des Moines doesn't do it alone. West Des Moines doesn't take care of their own by themselves. Urbandale doesn't operate in a vacuum. We do this together. We also together plan for the deployment and financing of regional water production assets. It's not. This isn't the Des Moines Water Works show anymore, and it shouldn't be. That we think of these things together. And most important, and I think rightfully so, our wholesale customers would like to have some sort of participation and voice in the rate setting process, and I think we can get there. We can share this governance without the exchange of money. So let's look at this. So how do we get there? We established a founding agreement. I'm just giving you that term because I'm going to refer to it again. This founding agreement would be, the parties would be Des Moines Water Works, all entities producing and distributing water today, so those water boards that exist, and then the municipal and county governments in this region. All of those entities would be parties to this agreement. There are four founding principles that I'm going to detail: production capacity, capital improvement plans, rate setting, and new water agreements. And again, because I did this rather quickly, those may not be self-evident, but hopefully they will be here as I go through this. All right. And I'm calling this the Central Iowa Regional Water Authority, but we can call it whatever we want. The overarching concept here is that water is a vital and shared resource. Any new production capacity that would increase water production in this region would be approved by this board. So that would mean that any entity that wanted to build a plant or increase production at a current facility would have to go before this board for approval.
This board, the new board.
The new board, the Central Iowa Regional Water Authority, which would be a new entity formed under this founding agreement. They would also, this board, this authority, would approve the ownership structure of any new water facilities that increase water capacity. So think for a minute about, we have significant growth in this area. There's going to be a need for additional capacity. Des Moines Water Works wants to increase production at one of its facilities. It can't just do that on its own. It has to go to this board and make its case, and this board would have to approve it. This is important because this gets to that very first part, and that is that we're managing the resource of water as a region. And I'm going to come to disputes in a minute, so we'll get to that in case there's if the board decides, if the authority decides something that maybe Des Moines Water Works or West Des Moines disagrees with, there's going to be a mechanism for that, and I'll get to that. Capital improvement plans. Capital improvement plans, and this is important when you think about Des Moines Water Works, is currently the only regional provider of water in this region. West Des Moines, for instance, produces enough water to meet its needs on most days and buys excess capacity for us. But today, they're not selling water throughout the region. Nobody is. The only entity that's a regional provider of water today is Des Moines. So really, this clause today concerns only Des Moines Water Works. Des Moines Water Works, or any regional provider of water, would submit a 5-year, I would suggest a 5-year, but perhaps a longer capital improvement plan for regional water production for the authority's review and approval every year. So that same capital improvement plan that Bill and the staff have been showing to us, they would begin to show to this authority. This authority would then have the ability to not only hear it, but also to vote on it and to approve it. It's possible that the authority would disagree with the proposal, and this would provide a mechanism for what happens if the authority says, we don't like this capital improvement plan, you're putting money in the wrong area. Des Moines Water Works or the regional entity would have 3 months to come back to the authority with a revised plan. Should at that point there still be a stalemate, the authority says no, in the founding agreement would be some sort of a plan for arbitration so that we could get to a resolution. Does this complicate or lengthen our budget session and our planning? It does. I mean, potentially you could be 6 months waylaid. So you'd have to contemplate in your founding document, how do you handle that delay? How does Des Moines Water Works continue to operate and not go into the hole in that process? But you begin to outline that. The next part of this, catch up on my computer here, is rate setting, and this is very important, I think, to the folks in the region, and that is that rate setting as well comes to the authority for review and approval. And it would be my hope that the goal of this, from the founding agreement of the authority, would be to get to that point that we talked about in the transfers of assets. And that's that we get to a unified rate in the region, so that those purchase capacity agreements can expire, or maybe they're eliminated before that 28 years is reached, but we get to a point where we reach a unified rate. But in any case, Des Moines Water Works, as the regional provider of water, brings that rate structure every year to the authority for review and approval. They would receive the exact same information that this board currently receives, the rationale for why rates are set and how they're set. The authority would have the ability to review and approve those. Again, should the authority say, and not, vote, not agree with those, there would be a mechanism for Des Moines Water Works to bring those rates back, and then a mechanism for arbitration. Fourth and the final principle, and this is important too, any new water agreements would be approved by the authority. So Des Moines Water Works, for instance, if it were going to create a new agreement with the city of Ankeny to sell water, it would have to bring it to this authority. And hopefully the idea with this is that we're all thinking as a region. There aren't any side deals. We're not making one deal with Ankeny that's different than a deal with West Des Moines or a deal with Altoona or something like that. That this board, as operates as that public body where these things are discussed and rates are set in a uniform manner. I think that my hope is that a proposal like this gets away from creating the kind of winners and losers that could happen in a transfer of assets type of model, where again there's that transfer of asset and transfer of money. There's those obstacles that are put in place that I see as unnecessary at this point. But most important, that voice and participation that is so needed throughout the region is allowed to happen here. It's my hope that by creating this authority, you create an authority with real teeth and real power. I mean, they're not just... I know why there's some interest in ownership, because I guess when you own the deed, you feel like you're in total control. But by providing this authority the ability to review and approve capital improvement plans, review and approve rates and how rates are set, you're allowing participation that it doesn't exist today in a very meaningful way. And we can discuss, and you'll notice that intentionally I didn't discuss how this board is constituted, how members are appointed, how many members there are. That is something that I think is for a fair discussion. Should Des Moines Water Works forward this outline of proposal, this is something that the region should discuss. I'll only mention that I have a concern in the proposal that was presented earlier and that we've talked about earlier, and I've mentioned this to all of you in a meeting prior. If you create a board that's appointed based on consumption, those areas who consume more water have more members on the board, you're creating a potential conflict down the road. And for Diane's benefit, she's one person who wasn't here the last time we discussed this. Think for a moment of some new company, some new industry that we've never imagined before that uses a whole bunch of water. And they were to come into the area. Well, if suddenly they set up shop in a Waukee, and now Waukee becomes the largest user of water because you have potentially a wasteful user of water in this new industry, Waukee's going to be rewarded and have more seats on this board than somebody else. So I would just caution that consumption alone probably isn't a good mechanism to appoint people to this board. Probably make more sense to talk about population. I think, again, because we're a public utility, our job is to represent the public and residents, that it would make more sense to base it on residents and population so that we don't forget the individual user. But again, that's something that can be discussed later. That really, I kind of went fast there, but again, that was the concept that I wanted to forward, was one that allows us to provide that voice and participation throughout the region in a way that I think we can have a discussion that gets us around these obstacles that are going to break down negotiations. And just to recap, those obstacles are talking about money, talking about the transfer of assets, talking about all of these things that I think we may never be able to solve anyway, because we have to pass a referendum or we have to get a state law passed. I think an idea like this gets us around having to seek legislative approval, because it would be an agreement between all of these entities, a 2080 or 28F or whatever the right mechanism is. Allows us to get there. Down the road, I think it produces an entity that, as things change, this new authority could have the flexibility to do things. Potentially a fourth plant could be built, and perhaps the authority owns it and Des Moines Waterworks doesn't. I don't know. But the fundamental belief in all this is that the region operates as a whole and not against one another. And that's the concept that I think we should forward. So with that, I'll...
Grant, do I understand that each constituent utility would retain retail rate-making
Yes.
authority in their sole discretion?
Correct. And with the idea that the authority would approve that that wholesale rate, that unified rate that would go back to do that. And why do you do that? I mean, if Rick Mom was in charge tomorrow, God forbid, if Rick Mom was charged tomorrow, what you'd say is, we want one utility for the entire region. That utility is going to handle the retail entity. We can't get there. We can't put that string back. And so what we want to do is we want to create a way to get there. And so if we focus on setting that wholesale unified rate, that's probably as close as we can get.
And again, bonds come into play because the state law requires each board who has issued bonds to set total rates.
Correct.
Sufficient to cover operation and maintenance expenses, plus all debt service.
Correct.
And so that's a retained obligation. And in order to make that make sense, there's going to have to be some circumscribing of the wholesale
Correct.
rate-making process at the regional level. In other words, the region could not dictate operation below cost.
Correct.
Or something like that.
Correct.
You'd need some really strong teeth in that.
That's a good point. And let me mention one thing that I failed to address, and that is, we'll use West Des Moines as the example here. So, what this agreement doesn't touch is West Des Moines' ability to produce water. Maybe I did address this a little bit at the beginning. So West Des Moines has a 10 million gallon per day plant, let's say. They will continue to operate and distribute their water within West Des Moines just as they do today. In a perfect world, does that make it more difficult for us to operate as a region? Absolutely. Because today, West Des Moines, this sounds more negative than I mean to be, but West Des Moines can surf off of us. They use their water and they produce cheap water, and then when they need it, they take water from us. If you're planning for the region, that's probably not the way you'd set up the system. But that's where we are today. And that's where we would leave that intact. The only time that West Des Moines has to come before this authority would be as if they're going to increase that capacity. Or if they increase it to a point where they're going to start to sell that regionally. Which is entirely possible, but that also is a decision that's made collectively in the region. So in a way, it's not a fair comparison to a public utilities board, but in a way that's kind of a mechanism here that this authority would serve. It would be that kind of that final authority when it comes to who can sell and what the rates are.
If no money changes hands, isn't there going to have to be some reconciliation of purchase capacity in wholesale rates going forward?
Under this scenario, money wouldn't change hands.
Right, so you'll still need a purchase capacity wholesale rate, won't you?
Yes, you would.
You had that on your slide.
Right, you would.
As well as something like with storage rate, the Johnston.
Right.
The Johnston rate.
Yeah, and the Johnson rate's a good example. The Johnson's kind of a standalone item. I mean, they have a rate that's different than everybody else's. That probably remains under this scenario. But hopefully over time, you get to a point where you can begin to figure a new way to do that.
So I think this gives you an idea of two of the numerous options that could be presented to this regional entity, or to the regional group that's looking at ideas and plans and what our options are for the future. So, but what I like about these two very specific examples, which could change, is that one goes with, I'll call it the mayor of Ankeny's thought, and that is, let's just expand the board. We just want to be on the board. We want to better understand the rates, et cetera. The other one goes back to more of the Black and Beach idea of looking at the total assets. I don't know what's going to come back to this board to decide with the 28F agreement. I hope the talks don't break down between now and the end of December. I think we have all been very interested in taking care of our Des Moines customers. And as Mayor Gear often says, he said it twice in the last meeting, if you own a mall and 40% of your storefronts leave and go to another mall, you still have all the maintenance and infrastructure costs for that mall. And what we don't want to have happen is for Des Moines Waterworks to lose 40, 50% of the volume of the water that we sell by Urbandale building their own plant, or Waukee doing something, or West Des Moines deciding that they have to build an additional plant for their growth. We really like a great option to look at growth within the region together.
Can I ask a question here? Because I didn't hear this. I mean, what brought people together to do this, I don't understand that. I mean, when I think about these plants, this is an extraordinarily capital-intensive business, as all utilities are. And so, to me, it should be a goal to reduce duplication and optimize assets. The example you just gave with the mall, that's not a goal of retail, of retail consumer goods in this country. It is a goal for public utilities. So has that been discussed? Is that a goal that we're talking about? I mean, the thing that Graham talks about, a board that does a needs assessment and a capital budget approval, it really does talk about optimizing assets. So if you want to build something, you have to come in and say why when you look at all the assets in the region. Or if you want to have a capital budget and you want to invest in yours, and maybe somebody else can build a new facility that is cheaper than you continuing to invest in your facility, then the board could look at that. So how does that duplication reduction and asset optimization fit into this?
Yeah, and to answer your question, I think the only discussion, and Diana's here, she's been in all the meetings, and some others as well, but the only discussion that we had originally was what we didn't want to do was to duplicate efforts and have this regional entity overseeing all accounting, overseeing all bills, complete duplication of all payments that are made. So we did explore that early on. I don't think we've really had in-depth, believe me, none of our conversations have been as in-depth as what you just saw. But it's two different ideas, two different ways to go forward.
Well, I think the capital-intensive part that I'm talking about here is the production.
And that's right, Diane. I mean, that's the concept here, is that you separate production from distribution. And that those entities that handle their own distribution today, Clive and others, they continue to do that going forward. And they are the representative, they are the retail agent for that. Production is what we're talking about, and really because that's the most important thing. And also, to be clear, the proposal that I offer is maybe a hybrid or a slightly different idea than the mayor of Ankeny saying expand this board. I find that cumbersome. It's going to be difficult to do. You'd have to have a referendum, you'd have to save law change, you have a lot of things. What this does is create a new entity, but it hopefully provides that entity with the authority it needs to satisfy the needs of the mayor of Ankeny and others.
Can I take a swing at your question has a lot of layers, Diane, and I appreciate the position you have coming into this level of complexity, but two things that I think you were asking among others. One of them is some of the history, why is this going on? And the other is the optimization long-range plan kind of piece of this. Let me start with the last first because it's easiest. There's a map over there near the camera that's a culmination of 18 months, 2 years of long-range planning with all of our customers. It says between now and 2040, based on anticipated growth, what needs to happen in terms of new assets. How we get there, obviously, is a lot of complexity, how you finance it, but there is a long-range plan that we think optimizes technology and optimizes resources and meets the need for future growth that's important in any utility, whether it's an electric one or a water utility. So that mechanism is already in place. The history, I think the long and short of it, is that there is a significant frustration from our wholesale customers that you, as fine Des Moines residents, set rates not only for Des Moines retail customers, but effectively set wholesale rates for the entire region, and they have no representation on this board. That's kind of the long and short of it. Out of that frustration and some views that there may be favorable economics, I'll start with Urbandale first. The city of Urbandale Water Utility, which has a separate board under Iowa law, a board appointed like yours by the mayor of Urbandale and approved by their city council, separate rate-making capabilities, has gone through an elaborate process of first analyzing whether it makes economic sense for them to build a 10 million gallon a day facility at about $50 million. They have, from that initial analysis, bought land and began the process of engineering to construct a 10 million gallon a day facility. West Des Moines and Waukee, further down the curve than that, have had discussions, have done additional analysis, and are similarly looking at that. My point is that those are big influences on our assessment that there's a real frustration on the governance side of this business relative to rate making, and the four principles that were important in our initial discussions with the CEOs of the water utilities, the chairs, and probably more important, the 6 mayors of the largest communities were rates, governance, exclusivity, that if you're in here, you don't build your own plant, and this idea that there would be no transfer of ownership. Now, again, some of those, there's a departure from some of those principles, or we wouldn't be talking about asset transfer. But that's kind of the history. There's a real sense from the suburban communities that you have a governance model here that's built on 1923, not 2017, and they have no representation in rate-making processes involving them. And Gary Lorentz from Ankeny, or Steve Gear, Bob Anderwig, mayors of growing communities, are interested in getting a fair amount of water that's necessary at a fair price, and they don't necessarily believe this governance structure delivers that. Despite the fact that we have a long-range plan that we think will take us to a fair amount, or the necessary amount of water, that isn't necessarily transferred into fair governance for them. That's my view of why we're here.
Diana, is there anything you want to add? Because being one of our customers, and is there anything that you think maybe from the history that led us to these regional discussions that you want to add that we haven't mentioned?
No, I think everything you've said is fair. It was the search for, not necessarily independence, but the ability to control water resources within our own community. And the effect, that negative effect it would have on the Des Moines business model is what brought us here. That in combination with the legislative action from earlier this year, I don't think that can be ignored as a draw to these conversations. But everything you mentioned was completely fair in my estimation.
So Sue, you've been asked to kind of ask us, as the Board of Des Moines Waterworks, to forward some sort of a proposal, to add a proposal to this.
I've been encouraged by one of the mayors in our community to step forward and to bring an idea forward. And that's really what led to our most recent meeting, well, a couple meetings ago when I said, okay, so in a perfect world, what would we want out of this? What would Des Moines Waterworks want? It doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree to that, but we have had a lot of information sharing. We have a terrific consultant that we're working with, and I think he is looking for a path forward now. And so when this mayor, not of our community, said, step up, and I would like to hear what you would like to see. Just put an idea out there. And that's what led to some of the conversations that we've most recently had. And I am not comfortable putting that out there until we have, first of all, a full board. We're glad you're here. But secondly, a better idea. Mark's attended a number of the meetings. We have reported out, we've had meetings for the, what is our committee called? Not community relations, customer relations. We've had a monthly meeting, we have had a monthly board meeting where we reported out. And I think it's time as a board, we need to figure out, is there a preference? Now, I'm not asking for a vote, but I'm simply asking for, what do you think? Is one idea totally out of line and another idea is something that is really where we thought we were going? And I think the other boards are having similar conversations.
So you're looking for some sort of feedback on, and I think it's a lot to ask, especially if Diane is new, but a lot to ask of the board to synthesize everything that was produced here tonight and say, I like this idea. Because maybe they like neither of them. But you're looking for some sort of guidance, and then maybe there's another meeting where we would have that vote and decide whether A, we're going to actually forward a proposal, and B, what that proposal might look like.
And I think there's a whole other layer there, Graham, because the word that you have in the middle of the slide, transparency, is something that I know. Dave, how many years have we been on this board together that we have strived to have transparency?
1962.
But we have strived to ensure that everything we are doing is completely transparent. I always say that, we represent the citizens of Des Moines here, but we really, today, are also representing the entire region because we are a regional utility. So I appreciate the Register being here. We want to put it out there and say, we're having these talks. What are your ideas? What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? And I do think there is a public comment process that we need to include in this for our residents, and maybe special meetings to ask the residents of Des Moines to hear about whatever idea we think is best, and then to hear from them.
So you want board members to think about this. You want board members to provide some sort of feedback of kind of where their mind is and where they want this to head, and then there would be another meeting, whether it's a special meeting or a meeting of this board, where those decisions would be made? Is that what you're thinking?
We are not at the point of making a decision because we don't have anything from this regional group back yet.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking is what?
I'm looking for preferences. I'm looking for, I like this, I don't like this, or here's another option, option number 2 that we considered, looking at the, maybe Diane with her skill set from other utility board involvement would have some other ideas for us to consider.
So how do you want to get that feedback is what I'm asking. How do you?
I think we are going to be going into these regional meetings. Next week we have one Monday night from 4 to 6. We have one Monday noon, at 11 o'clock. Wednesday morning at 7:30, Thursday evening,
Wednesday night.
Thursday night from 4 to 6. So we have lots of opportunities for it.
Just to be clear, when are the meetings? Sorry.
Monday at 11,
Monday at 11,
Wednesday at 7:30 a.m.
and that's in Urbandale.
Urbandale. Wednesday evening,
4 to 6.
4 to 6.
Here at Des Moines Water Works.
So come to those meetings, talk among the board, talk to Diana, talk to our regional customers, a variety of ways. I think it is important, Graham, that maybe we do have some additional meetings as a board on this topic specifically. I do not want to put anyone on the spot tonight and say, so Mark, what's your preference? And,
Right.
okay, welcome to the first meeting, Diane. But I want to start the dialogue as a board so that when I am in those meetings, I can represent all of us in the way that we're thinking.
Well, one thing I'd say, having participated in this, I think our consultant has been trying to extract that kind of preference from everybody and talking to people in trying to create whatever amalgamation they're going to recommend and try to put forward. I think he's also been trying to help get people to understand that a purchase capacity agreement is not a purchase of capital assets agreement. It's not equity stake. And further, we're 15 years into some of this stuff. The Saylorville water treatment plant, that money's coming back and has been for some time. And McMullen, some of these things have been repaid or are being repaid, and so that position's changing. People have a pretty good deal. That's been my position in the last 4.5 years, is that the reason people were purchasing water from Des Moines is it just made so much more sense from a cost. It was a good cost. You don't have to go into, like so many things in life from a business standpoint, I don't have to set up a staff and monitor how I'm going to produce water for our community and do all these things. And as Diane said, for the region, this is a good way. We have been monitoring and trying to deal with source issues and where are we going to go and working together. And there have been CERDWorks been working on a lot of these things and having these conversations. Kind of it's less formal in large ways, but we've had some agreements that come out of that. For me, I think most of the people in the city of Des Moines or any city think, hey, we pay for this stuff. What are we talking about? Somebody's going to come and be on our board and start telling us what we're going to charge. That's just an initial reaction. So there's got to be something that says, hey, at least that there's some, exchange that makes that sound equal and actually is equal to some degree, that that representation isn't just we're going to make decisions about. And I'm a little concerned the commitments that we made and the principles that we said we had up front, that those just 2 weeks ago we kind of headed in a different direction.
Right.
And I think I thought people recognized up front, from what we saw with Black and Beach, that arriving at those values and making exchanges and doing all that isn't really the business we want to be in. If we really wanted to create a regional utility, it's like we've talked about this water treatment plant. If we were going to start today figuring out how to make 105 million gallons of water a day capacity, we wouldn't create it the way that this one was created. But we've got some legacies there, and you got to work with what you've got. So going forward, how are we going to get there? And it does strike me, I don't think we're really talking about, people are bandying about that 40% of our customers are going to go away, or the sales are going to go away. And I don't think, if Urbandale, put up 10 million, or West Des Moines put up 15 million or whatever, that's not going to take all of our other customers aren't going to say, well, we're going to buy our water there. There's a whole lot of other things that would really make that expensive too, to try to work that through. And we've tried to work with Urbandale on some of these things, and I think the numbers aren't there. And you look at this kinds of things and for them, and I think it's just a matter of people want stuff. And what we ultimately need to do is what the whole region wants is it's not about the players and what they want, but it's what the customer wants, what the ratepayer wants. They want water that comes into their tap every day. And making decisions that are going to be non-economic, that's what we want to prevent. We want to have good decision-making. I don't know that some of the stresses that I'm hearing from some people saying, well, we'll just build our own. It just sounds more of a threat than a good faith, hey, we're trying to work together. And I'm a little concerned about that.
I want to be clear. I have found the group, the 6 mayors, the 3 board chairs, and the 3 CEOs for the utilities, to all be approaching this in a very proactive regional way. One of the very first things we did was we asked Ted to present the long-range plan, the information that we had done, so we were all grounded from the beginning. I could not, to a person, I am so appreciative of what Paula Dierenfeld, Mayor Dierenfeld has brought, Mayor Gear. Everyone has approached this correctly. There have been no threats. I want to make that perfectly clear. And I'm not coming here saying, oh, Urbandale's going to go. Urbandale has been fantastic to work with. Every one of these mayors has approached this as a regional opportunity. And I do think we have one chance to do this right. So I hope that in any of the messaging that I've given you, it's not, oh, we have to do this or else. That's not the case at all. Everyone's trying to approach this as a region. Diana, you've been at every meeting. Do you agree? I just don't feel that there are threats. I don't feel that people are out for themselves. This is our chance to get it right.
I wonder if I could interject myself here.
Sure.
I don't want to in any way cut off the discussion, but I would observe that we had scheduled a public hearing on our budget to commence at 3:30.
Sure.
And I don't know if anybody is here for that purpose. I wasn't taking things out of order, kind of upset the apple cart on the public hearing just a bit.
Does anyone else, Dave, you haven't said anything?
Laura, could you make sure that we get an email about those 3 meetings and who will be there?
Well, I guess I'm done.
A little bit.
Did you have anything else, Mark? Go ahead.
I'm done, I guess, so we're done.
Okay, let's table this if we could, or complete this report out. I very much appreciate the presentation, Amy and Graham. So with that, we will return to our agenda. Let's take a 2-minute break. So for those that do want to excuse themselves, feel free to move on. So we're back to our agenda, item 3A, proposed 2018 budget. Bill.
Thank you, Sue. Item 3A, and Michelle Holland has a brief presentation that those of you on Finance and Audit have seen before on the budget. Let me just hit 2 points. It'll take 30 seconds, Michelle, so you might as well get yourself up there in the interest of time. First, the budget before you is a work product of significant importance, obviously, to the organization, and one in which I always have the pleasure of working with our staff throughout the organization, from the senior management team down into our production and distribution and customer service staff. You'll note that it's about a $77 million O&M and CIP budget for calendar year 2018. There are some other pieces of that, debt service and reserve, that take it well over $80 million. So it is an important and vital piece of our direction going forward. In working with the staff to essentially put the priorities where we think is important moving forward, We're forwarding a couple issues that I think is important to recognize as you go through some of the concepts here that Michelle will talk about here in a moment. One is that we are putting an emphasis on water main replacement. Dan Cloffer, our engineering staff, and certainly Ted and the distribution staff have long emphasized that we are investing in our distribution system. We believe that what we are providing you is a path forward for greater investment in the distribution system. We have brought in the benefit of a third-party consultant, HDR, as an engineering consultant to do the condition assessment and to do some planning with us that takes us to some pretty important American Water Works standards on what we should experience ideally in terms of breakages. And we are experiencing more of those than we should be given industry standards. So we are trying to square that moving forward with an emphasis in the budget on over $5 million in Des Moines water system improvements or water main replacement. A second piece of that is particularly in kind of light of some of the discussions that we've had in the last several months about priorities with suburban plants versus the Fluor Drive plant. We're putting more of an emphasis realistically on capital investment in the Fluor Drive plant at this point in our collective history. A lot of data here, particularly for Diane, but really for those of you who have been here for a long period of time, you know the budget process is relatively complex with our operating, maintenance, and capital budget. Given the revenue that we see generating next year with an estimated 17 billion gallons of production, we believe that this is an appropriate and measured budget for us to move forward. But without further ado, Michelle, why don't you tell us? I'm sorry.
I think we should have a public hearing.
Oh, we probably should open the public hearing. Okay.
I'll take my cheat sheet.
You take your cheat sheet, indeed you will.
Thank you. So I'd like to announce that we're opening a public hearing for comment from the public regarding the project plans contract.
Actually,
on
right down the line. On the budget.
Agenda item 3A.
Okay, agenda item 3A. And we have a public hearing. We're looking for comments from the public. Do we have anyone here that would like to express an opinion on this?
And I believe it's correct that staff has not received any public or any oral or written comments. Is that correct, Mr. Still?
That is. Mr. Baum.
Okay. With that, we'll close the public hearing. And we have found that the board does not, now we have discussion. So with that, we'll have our presentation, Michelle.
Okay. In your packet of materials, you have a, I believe, 27-page document. I think a good page to land on for the presentation would be page 4. It's got a lot of numbers on it. Des Moines Water Works proposed 2018 budget, and this compares to the 2017 approved budget. So all of our comparisons, 2018 budget is being compared to the 2017 approved budget. So we'll land on that page. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that just will highlight some of these things in here. I'm going to go fairly quick, so any questions while I'm talking, feel free to interrupt as we go through this. So our first thing that we do when we look at our budget is we need to budget our pumpage for the following year. So you can see up here the last, I think this is 7 years of annual pumpage. And as you can see, 2012 and 2013 were some pretty big years, 18.5 billion gallons, 17.6 billion gallons. Then we hit some dismal years, if you will, as far as water pumpage goes, 16.1 billion and all the way down to 15.8 billion in 2015. Do kind of keep 2015 in this, I'm going to call it dismal, in the back of your head because we will come full circle with this. 2016, 17.1 billion gallons. That's where we have been budgeting these past couple of years. 2017, we're forecasted to hit about 18 billion gallons. So, woohoo, a good year as far as water sales go. And as Bill mentioned, our 2018 budget is budgeted at 17 billion gallons. If you take an average of 2012 through 2016, that comes out to right at 17.0. So our budget is right there in this average. We don't want to predict a wet year. We don't want to predict a hot, dry year. We kind of want to budget right at an average level.
And at the risk of being too elementary here, the budgeting number for amount of water produced is important from two aspects. One, it gives us a revenue projection, given rates that the board has approved for 2018. But it also gives us a cost projection, if you will, relative to chemicals as an example, and hours worked for our employees. So pretty important as we move forward. 17 billion.
17 billion is the number where we
used
start.
in my tenure. And fortunately, the statistics bear it out, although there's some variance in the statistics.
Absolutely. And as Bill said, then we take that 17 billion gallons that we are going to budget, and we build a revenue budget off of that. And so at the last board meeting, this board approved a 7% rate increase across most of the service areas. Whoops, there we go. And so that 7% rate increase is effective on April 1st of 2018. So as you can see on this slide, water sales make up about 90% of our total revenue. So at about $56.7 million relating to water sales. The other 10% I'm not going to touch too much on, but other sales and services, debt service revenue that we receive from those wholesale participants that participated in the bond issue that we talked about a little bit earlier. That billing service revenue, we do the billing and collecting for City of Des Moines, for example, Pleasant Hill, also for the home serve. And then we have some other revenues making up that list. I'm going to continue down on page 4 now into our operating expenses. This has come straight out of that section here, that middle section on page 4. Our operating expenses, again, I'm going to compare it to the prior year, the 2017 budget. For 2018, we are proposing a budget of $43.4 million in operating expenses. That's about a 4.2% increase over the prior year. You can see the percent change here for the most part, kind of down the line, pretty moderate increases. There are a couple that you'll see that stick out. Residual removal is one of them. We have 2 plants that produce residuals, the Fluor plant and the McMullen plant. And so we have residual removal expense. That's going up about $870,000 in 2018. A little bit complicated here. At the McMullen plant, the residuals go through this 3-stage cycle, if you will. We fill a lagoon, we dry the lagoon, and then those residuals are removed. So we have this 3-stage cycle. At McMullen, we have 2 lagoons. Okay, so we kind of have 3 round pegs going into 2 square holes. What that does is that doesn't keep a constant expense each year because we are having to remove as it dries, after it goes through that drying process. So we are budgeted to remove 53,000 tons of lagooned material from the McMullen treatment plant next year. The other outlier on here are legal fees. Those are going down. The 2017 budget includes $450,000 legal fees related to the nitrate lawsuit. Obviously, we are not budgeting those legal fees in 2018. So there you can see that being reduced. Quick look at just the operating budget through the past couple of years. You'll see some pretty moderate increases. We kind of strive to be in that area 3, 4, 5%. You will see an outlying year in 2016 at 10.5% in the increase in the operating budget. If memory serves, I believe that was the first year we budgeted for the long-range plan at about $460,000. And that was also the first year of the budgeting for the nitrate lawsuit. So that kicked that up. But as you can see, some fairly moderate increases through the years. The next slide shows our operating expenses and what makes up those operating expenses. As you can see, and I think it was mentioned also in a previous comment, labor and benefits makes up a little over half of our operating budget at $22.2 million. Of that, labor is about $14 million and benefits is about $8.1 million. I'm going to just jump over to the what makes up that $8.1 million of benefits, primarily employee medical, and I apologize that this isn't too readable up on the screen, but I do think it's in your materials. About $3.1 million is for employee medical, the contribution that Des Moines Water Works makes for employee medical. The next big section would be retirement expenses. A couple of things that are in there primarily, it's the IPERS. Des Moines Water Works is required to submit as an employer 8.93, so nearly 9% of wages. The employee has a contribution as well. It's 5.95, so that's $1.5 million. We also have FICA taxes in there, Medicare and Social Security, that the employer pays. Then we do also have $1.2 million budgeted for the Des Moines Water Works pension. This is the actuarial defined contribution that Des Moines Water Works needs to make into the pension. It is a frozen plan, as you may recall, but we still are required to make these annual contributions. Rounding out this are deferred comp, what we, Des Moines Water Works, matches for our employees 457 plan. We have CEO retention on there, our flex dollars, and our car allowance. So as you can see, $8 million. This is about a 50% of our total labor, 50% for benefits. I'm going to go back to our expense budget. As we talked about, labor and benefits, about 50%. Chemicals right here at about $5.1 million. There's only about 3.3% increase in chemicals year over year, so some pretty moderate increases in chemicals. A pretty good year as far as that goes. Purchase services, $5.4 million. What's in here? One of the large things in here is the pilot. The payment to the City of Des Moines, $1.1 million for next year. This also includes numerous things, IT maintenance contracts, banking, audit, payroll, engineering studies, those services for our plant maintenance, and so on. Next section here is this purple one, utilities, $2.6 million. This is primarily energy for those 3 treatment plants. Next section, materials and equipment. This is the parts, pieces, supplies, any number of things, the lab materials, the parts to fix the vehicle fleet, asphalt, concrete, aggregate, just all of those things within the utility. Residual removal, $2.3 million, as we talked about. Corporate insurance is right about $1.3 million, and then other, our legal expenses, postage, phone, fuel, and that sort of thing. I'm going to continue down on that page 4. We've just talked about operating expenses. The next section down is our capital budget. Our capital budget for next year is budgeted right now at $33.2 million. And as Bill said, our primary focus next year is on water main replacement. We have about $6.8 million budgeted for water main replacement, and that is primarily in the City of Des Moines. I believe about $5.4 million of that is for main replacement within the City of Des Moines. The next section of projects, which are these pinkish and purple ones, are joint projects that we are doing with other entities. These are joint projects that are either fully funded by the other entities or partially funded. For example, the Des Moines Water Works Park Foundation, budgeted at $5.4 million. That is entirely funded by the Park Foundation. A couple of other ones, the Joint Southwest Feeder Main and Pump Station, funding being provided by Norwalk, Cumming, and West Des Moines. The Joint Northwest Feeder Main and Pump Station from Polk City. That one's actually partially funded by us, as we will get some benefit in our northern part of our service area. The Waukee-Xenia feeder, again, fully funded. Also, we are putting some emphasis in the Fluor Drive treatment plant. We have about $1.5 million being budgeted for capital here at the Fluor treatment plant, that being our flagship treatment plant, putting in some capital dollars into it. The middle section here is this $2.5 million for our new customer information and billing software, something we are pretty excited about. We do have, this represents the second year of that budget. In 2017, we have about $2.2 million. This $2.5 million finishes that project out. Work is in full swing on implementing that. The last section is departmental capital. That's just normal replacement in each of the departments. It's PCs, it's meters and MTUs, valves, pumps, things like that, just those normal kind of recurring things that we have to do in each of the departments. So as I said, $33.2 million is the capital budget for 2018. Those projects funded, those joint projects, about $10.5 million funded by the other entities. The Park Foundation that we talked about, $5.4 million. We do have carryover projects from 2017. Those are projects that you as a board approved in 2017 that aren't going to be completely done in 2017. So we carry over that money into 2018. Which gives us this number of funded by utility revenue. An important number, this is a number that we've seen steadily increase through the years, as we've talked about with the long-range plan and the 5-year CIP. It is a capital-intensive business, and so we do have a lot of capital needs. I'm going to jump off of that page 4 quickly just to talk about staffing in full-time equivalents. We are budgeted next year for about 214 full-time equivalents. As you can see, about 60% of that is made up of water distribution and water production staff. That's about 130 full-time equivalents in those two departments. Customer service, 36. That not only includes the call center here and data quality, but also that field customer service staff that we have. Engineering, 21 FTEs, and then what I would consider the admin, administrative support departments, makes up about 13% of our full-time equivalent staff. Last slide I'm going to talk about is the budgeted staffing by year, and certainly what this is going to show, we do have movement between departments from time to time, but the total here shows it's an overall fairly flat FTE look, as actually trending downward a little bit if you start with about the 220s down to about the 215, 214 range. So that was all I had here. If we want to go back quickly to page 4, we talked about the revenue section. 17 billion gallons, 7% rate increase. We talked about those operating expenses. That's the 4.2% higher than last year. $43.4 million in an operating budget. Capital budget, $33.2 million, of which 15 million of that's being funded by other entities. About 3/4 of the way down on page 4, we then have our debt service obligation, so about $4.3 million payments for principal and interest on our bonds. And then finally, the last section is the operating reserves. Every year we budget $500,000 to increase our operating reserves. As our operating budget goes up every year, so does the need for the reserves. So we have a $500,000 increase budgeted to be there. And then we also have $1 million to reimburse those operating reserves. Remember when I said 2015 was a pretty dismal year? We were about $3 million short in revenue that year. And so we committed to then using the reserve money and then rebuilding, repaying, if you will, that reserve $1 million for the next 3 years. So that was 2016, 17, and this budget is the third and final payment, if you will, reimbursing ourselves for those operating reserves. So, which will be nice because then we won't have that next year, fingers all crossed, to free up some money, hopefully, for some capital improvement. That then gets us to a balanced budget. And my last comment would be, starting on page 15, is pretty much the nitty-gritty, a lot of the details. This is by department, by work plan, a quick little description of what's in each work plan, what's being budgeted there, comparisons to the 2017 budget, and then any comments on anything rather large variances. So with that, I think it was quick, but
A
in the interest of
tremendous amount
time.
of work.
It is a
Thank you,
tremendous amount of work
Michelle. And this
by
is really-
by everyone, a lot of
Diane, it
departments.
takes about 6 months to build this budget, and we start in finance not at Felton Grant.
Yeah. And I'd just like to say and to ask Diane to consider this if she's considered this, because one thing we consider with finance and audit, and thanks to staff's help, is how we present these numbers and how we look at them. And having your fresh pair of eyes on this, don't assume that we think we're doing this right necessarily. If there's a better way for us to present these numbers, we want to do that. And you'll see in other discussions, we're going to have some opportunities next year to think about how we present the budget and how we consider these numbers. And so, jump in.
Great point. Okay, so with that, I'm going to be looking for a motion to approve the 2018 Des Moines Water Works budget.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all interested in approving, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you very much. And thank you, Michelle, great work.
Thanks, Michelle.
Moving on to our next action item, we have item number B. Bill?
Okay, the rules and regulations update, as you know, on basically an annual basis. Our operating staff in particular, as well as coordination with our legal staff, go through our kind of voluminous rules and regulations to update. Some of it is mere engineering news record updating of costs to make sure that we are actually charging customers at the accelerating costs that we face as a provider. But often there are a few substantive rules in here. Both Dave and Mark have heard a pretty lengthy presentation at the planning committee level. I'm going to shortcut that. Ted and Brady McDonald in particular, and as well as Amy Kaler, have spent a significant amount of time on going through our rules and regs and updating this again with Rick's support in terms of making sure that we are consistent in how we're approaching it. You have on page 1, past the yellow sheet, kind of the highlights of major areas. I'm just going to really focus on a couple that I think are important for you to know that we have made substantive changes in. They really focus on 2 areas. One of them are on stop boxes, which, as you know, are part of the privately owned portion that are connecting the publicly owned water system to individual residences or businesses. Stop boxes are a troublesome area. The Home Serve program deals with service lines and stop boxes, but as accounts transfer, there are often issues associated with stop boxes. Certainly, we are there to facilitate necessary repairs and necessary servicing, but we are not going to step into the responsibility for the service line of the stop box. Some of the rule clarity we have provided here through amendments in the rules involve fees to go out and inspect the stop boxes at the customer's request, as well as the sometimes clunky process of changing service from one owner or one tenant to another. Occasionally there are failures in the stop box process. Our rules here clarify that the last owner in the sequence of the title chain will be responsible under your rules. A second category of changes that are not stop box related to go to sub-metering. Amy Kaler just had me sign a sub-metering agreement today. These are often pretty complicated premise-by-premise agreements where there's a master meter that is in fact what we collect off of, but there is a need on behalf of multiple tenants, as an example of a location, to be billed through the landlord, as an example. Manufactured home communities are often in this category. Some pretty complicated agreements that are necessary to be able to support our customer needs there, including sub-metering. There's some fees being added here based on our cost structure, a $500 per agreement administrative fee, and then sub-metering by accounts at $50. I think those are the primary changes. Ted
anything else you would emphasize for their benefit as trustees here relative to major changes? There are a number of other changes here, obviously, but am I missing a point of emphasis that you would emphasize?
I think those are the two most significant.
Happy to answer any questions you might have on this, but again, essentially, these are squaring up your pretty important rules and regulations that are what developers and customers, engineering firms rely on in how they are working with us to provide drinking water to individual locations. The process of updating is pretty important, but there are a number of fees in here relative to lab and other a la carte items that we provide to a number of different customers in a number of different categories that have to be updated on a regular basis, or we're essentially not charging at the appropriate costs of the utility. Happy to answer any questions, or Ted would even be more happy, I'm confident.
So I'm going to be looking for a motion to approve the proposed revisions to the rules and regulations with an implementation date of January 1, 2018, and direct publication of the changes as required by statute.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any other discussion?
If I could provide a clarification.
Sure.
The publication of the full text of the rules is done by placing it on the Des Moines Water Works website. The portions of these changes that change the rates to be charged are published in a newspaper of general circulation as required by a statute.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other comments?
Wasn't this the one that has the city fees?
The system development fees, yes, David, I'd be happy to talk about that. The changes here now make system development fees applicable to the city when they add a facility onto our existing capital structure. They formerly have been exempted. There are a number of reasons why staff is recommending that, and frankly, in our discussions with the city, it has not come up as a major issue for them. You'll recall a discussion about the pilot fees. There are a number of what I'll call a la carte charges that are coming back to us from the city. We feel the need under that circumstance to make sure that there's a reciprocal charge back to the city for those services that we provide to them, other than those that we are required by existing agreement to provide at no charge, like potable water in their non-enterprise locations. We just view that this squares up our commitment for capital infrastructure with users, including city users. Dan, anything you want to add to that?
Very well done. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving along to item C. We are moving now. Okay, the 2018 water treatment chemicals analysis of bids. Bill?
You'll see probably more so on the beyond the yellow sheet, the laundry list of chemicals that are used by our production staff in the production of drinking water for our customers. Item 3C involves that laundry list other than lime. Lime, as you know, is the major chemical expense that we face out of roughly the $5 million here. 2 or so, or nearly 2 are lime-related. Item 3C deals with those other than lime. I do want to say in my comment here that what Mike and his staff, in working with our purchasing department and soliciting providers in each of these laundry list of chemicals have found are good buys, if you will. When we look at using the 17 billion gallon production estimates for 2018 relative to the pricing we had in 2017, we're actually slightly a tick down in terms of costs that we're anticipating next year. And that's frankly because of very good shopping and very good specification on behalf of our production and our purchasing staff. So I am pleased to be able to recommend your approval for the 2018 contract for water treatment chemicals to these low responsible bidders.
I'm looking for a motion then to that effect.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
I would also move that we waive the annual tradition of the chair reading all of the chemicals.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item
Spread out the
3D, the
chemicals.
2018 water treatment chemicals.
And this focuses entirely on Lyme, as you know, a major issue, both in terms of expense. Our recommendation here is for estimated expense of about $2.2 million. Lyme is a major component when we talk about residuals. Diane, that's what we're talking about, disposal of Lyme in, Lyme out. We pay for it to put it in, we pay for it to get rid of it after we put it through our process. You'll remember previously, for the four of you who were here last year, there's sometimes a fighting issue between two major providers, Mississippi and Linwood Lyme. Historically, we have used each provider, Linwood for here at the fluoride plant, and Mississippi for the McMullen treatment plant. Over time, Mike and his staff have developed significant analysis that indicates that the Mississippi line, even though more expensive per ton, is more efficient in its use. And ultimately, the delta, the difference you see here of about $200,000, $175,000, is through a great deal of work, again, on behalf of our production staff and lab in particular, in doing a chemical analysis of the effectiveness of these two different providers. Last year was the first year in which we had moved entirely to Mississippi. We're recommending a similar contract as we move forward. But again, a lot of work from Mike and his staff to look at the relative effectiveness of both of the providers, do a bid analysis, a bid tab in this kind of circumstance. It's pretty complicated, and hence the recommendation that we're making to you to move forward with Mississippi Lyme as a provider for both the Maffitt facility as well as the Fluor Drive facility at an estimated cost of about $2.152 million.
Looking for a motion to award the 2018 Lyme contract to the Mississippi Lyme Company in the amount of $2,132,488.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next, we have item 3E, acceptance of the McMullen Water Treatment Plant chemical feed line relocation.
Final step in your public bidding and acceptance process is the acceptance, as the titling of this indicates. This is about a $241,000, $500 project, a pretty significant one that's been completed to our satisfaction by Synergy. The staff recommendation is for you to accept this project on behalf of Des Moines Waterways.
Looking for a motion to accept the McMullen Water Treatment Plant chemical feed line relocation project completed by Synergy Contractors, LLC, in the amount of $240,600.60. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3F, acceptance of the 2017 Des Moines Water System Improvements, Contract 3. Bill?
And it's the pigeonholing, if you will, of a emergency repair and aftermath associated with a water main break on the far southeast side of Des Moines, near Maury and East 25th, as I recall, in that area where we had a water main break, portion of which involved having to deal with a rail bed with its own series of environmental concerns as well as concerns that require a significant amount of subcontracting. Staff recommends the payment to Holbrook here associated with that repair of roughly $198,000.
I'm looking for a motion to accept the 2017 Des Moines Water System Improvements Contract 3, completed by Holbrook Construction, Inc., in the amount of $197,892.24. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Moving along, item 3G.
Item 3G was an issue that you're going to be familiar with, that at least 4 of you will be familiar with, and was mentioned actually in Michelle's CIP discussion just a few moments ago. You'll recall that you have entered into, on behalf of Des Moines Waterworks, a 2080 agreement with the cities of Norwalk and Cumming involving transmission improvement in that area to provide greater amounts of our water from the MAPIT treatment facility to our wholesale customers in Norwalk and our total service customer in Cumming. Throughout those discussions, which have really occurred largely from Dan and Amy and Ted over the last 18 months or so, there's been some equivocation on West Des Moines' part as to whether they wanted to participate in process of also being involved in this transmission line improvement. Ultimately, they've come back to us after you've entered into a 3-party agreement with Des Moines Waterworks, Cumming, and Norwalk. They want to be included as a 4th party in that agreement, and what you have before you is an amendment essentially to 2018 to allow that to include West Des Moines Waterworks. Happy to answer any questions you might have here. This is a project that is financed by those constituent communities, not by Des Moines Waterworks.
Okay. Counselor, I do have a question. In the motion, the way that this is stated on the yellow,
Yes.
I've never seen the Des Moines Waterworks trustees of the city of Des Moines, Iowa listed. Is there a reason that we're asking for that language?
She's looking at the board requested action. Actually, that is your legal.
That's our.
That is your
That's
legal
your legal
name.
name of the entity?
We
Yes.
state that in the
Right.
motion.
It's the, when we entered the 2080 agreements, they're entered in the name of the Board of Waterworks Trustees of the City of Des Moines, Iowa, rather than Des Moines Waterworks, which is sort of the
Shorthand
name rather than
Thank you.
the entity name.
So I'm seeking a motion to approve and authorize the chairperson to the First Amendment to the Chapter 28E agreement among the City of Norwalk, City of Cumming, and the Board of Waterworks Trustees of the City of Des Moines, Iowa, providing for jointer by the Board of Waterworks Trustees of the City of West Des Moines for design, construction, and funding of the joint Southwest Pumping Station and feeder main. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Item 3H. Bill?
This is a fairly typical street improvement project where the city of Des Moines informs us that as part of their capital improvement program, they are doing major work on a city street. This happens to be McKinley Avenue being reconstructed from Southeast 7th to Southeast 14th. As part of that process, we will relocate our water main as part of a larger project itself, and we have the benefit of the economies of scale of that fully bundled project as opposed to doing it individually. Dan and his staff carefully coordinate with the city engineering staff at the City of Des Moines. The staff recommendation here is to move forward authorizing staff to reimburse the City of Des Moines up to $361,193 for the relocation associated with the McKinley Avenue reconstruction.
So I'm looking for a motion to authorize staff to reimburse the City of Des Moines for water main relocations for McKinley Avenue reconstruction from Southeast 7th Street to Southeast 14th Street. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? And this is something in the 10 years since I've been on the board that we have far more coordination with the City of Des Moines. Talk about economies of scale. This is a great example. So thank you, Dan, for coordinating that.
Did we get a second?
Dave said.
Diane.
Or Diane said.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3I is the 2017 Crystal Lake Access Gate.
And it may be helpful for Diane's benefit just to
describe the public bidding process here in 3 steps that you as board members typically see. This is the second step. Often we'll come to you with a request to solicit bids for a project. It depends on the project as to whether we come to you or not. If it's significantly big enough or one of interest, we'll come to you with a request to solicit bids. We receive the bids and open it as part of the public bidding process and come to you requesting approval for the bid, and then the final step is the acceptance that we had in some of the prior projects that you've approved as a board member, as board members. This particular project, we're in step 2 here, where we're asking you to accept the public bid for some gate improvements, some automated gate improvements at our Crystal Lake facility and the Method treatment facility. Long and short of it is we continue to be concerned about physical security, about cyber security, both as an entity. This is a gate that actually is shared jurisdiction with a number of people. CenturyLink, as I recall, also has an interest for access through this process. We've used a physical locking system that has led to some frustration and insecurity. We're moving to an improved gate access process here at about $101,000. Staff recommends your approval of this bid or acceptance of this bid to Widener Construction, who's done work for us and actually is doing our work associated with the nitrate waste removal process. If you go to the Raccoon River Bridge right now to the north, going up MLK, you'll notice, first of all, on the west side of the bridge, construction pipe laying there. If you go up to where the old art store used to be at High, you'll see that intersection is closed. If you try to use the turn lane to go down Ingersoll, as an example, you'll notice cones sometimes and lane restrictions. That's all associated with our project of taking the waste that we formerly have discharged by permit into the Raccoon River from our denitrification process now into a sanitary sewer line that extends underneath the river, underneath the railroad, and up the hill to a manhole near the old art store. This particular project, again, done by Widener, a long way away from the McMullen or Method treatment facility, but you have some familiarity with Widener because of their work right now with us involving the waste connection to the sanitary sewer line. Happy to answer any questions in that very long-winded description.
I will first open the public hearing and look for any comments from the public regarding the form of contract, plans, specifications, and estimated cost. Seeing that we do not have anyone here, have we received any written or oral comments?
We have not.
Okay, I will close the public hearing. And Bill, it appears that we have no other facilities of the kind that have been constructed.
It's true, you then call for certification to that as a 28E18 finding.
Thank you. Now I'm looking for a motion for adoption of the form of contract, plans, and specification and estimated cost.
So moved.
A second.
Did you get a second? Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And now an analysis of the bids, which I think Bill has already shared with us. So moving right along, I will be looking for your approval to award the 2017 Crystal Lake Access Gate to Widener Construction in the amount of $100,891 and authorize the chairperson and CEO and general manager to execute the contract. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay, item 3J.
This is a conveyance of property, conveyance of facilities and water main capacity. I should be more specific. That really fulfills the 28E that you've entered into some time ago, 3 years ago now, with the city of Johnston involving increased capacity in Johnston. This is the final step to essentially convey ownership of their connection facilities, of our connection facilities to the city of Johnston under that agreement.
Excellent. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the conveyance of ownership of the connection facilities and water main capacity and authorize the chairperson, CEO, and general manager to execute you of the conveyance of ownership.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed. The next item, I'll just call your attention to the 2018 schedule of board meetings. I will be looking for a motion to adopt the proposed schedule for the Waterworks Board of Trustee and Committee meetings.
So
Do I have a
moved.
motion? Okay, and a second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Moving right along, under the board committee reports, we've covered Customer Relations Committee. However, I do have Craig here, and he'll be handing out the document to all of you. I believe this is going out today. Tomorrow. I believe we have about 170 individuals on our distribution list that we believe have an interest in what's going on with the regionalization discussions. Craig, as you know, is on contract with us and works closely with Laura. But this is the second document that we have prepared that we will be sending out electronically. And Craig offered to bring this along. Craig, do you want to say anything else about this?
Just everything we talked about tonight earlier was very complicated. This publication is for public consumption to kind of just give them an idea of all the steps we're going through, all the meetings that are taking place. So this is kind of a 30,000-foot view of this regionalization process versus the intimate details we kind of delved into earlier tonight.
Thank you very much. And believe me, Craig tried to be more specific, and I kept saying, get out of the weeds. We want to generally lay this out and make sure that everyone's aware of where the upcoming meetings are. So Craig, thank you.
David's schedule
And
is
Laura,
next
for
week.
your work.
Notice the schedule for next week. Thank you.
Ted, did you see your minute?
Yeah, nice headshot there, Ted.
Careful where you sit.
Yeah, no, that's a good angle for you.
I believe we've already reported out on a lot of these things, but anything else regarding the planning committee that we did not cover tonight?
I don't think so.
Okay. Mark, anything else?
No.
Okay. Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden Board, and I know that that is one thing Peggy has served on for us, and I don't know that she has anything to report.
I don't think there's anything new to report other than I'll remind the board that we'll extend an invitation early in the first quarter of 2018 for Stephanie and Julia to come and talk to you a little bit about some of the developments over there. They're all positive.
I will also say, as you look at these committee reports, and we also have finance and audit, which we did not meet this past month, but Diane, you will have the great opportunity to be on one of these committees as well as to attend any of the committee meetings if you would like to. So with that, Mark, the Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation Board, anything besides what we have in the packet?
Well, what was fun was making the Des Moines Register and local news with a splash on what's going to happen and things to look at, exciting things for the city of Des Moines, and having that. We're actually on the budget this year, and that's a good thing. We've actually got real money coming in and in the bank account, and so it's kind of nice just to see everything coming together, all the work. We've got fantastic people on that board that are, it's, as everyone knows, these are voluntary positions that people come in, and there's not really a staff. There's one person, and we've made use of some interns that are coming in from Drake and some other places that are helpful. We've got an office over here at the former AIB. They've got some office space that's made available for community groups like this, nonprofits. And every year in December, we kind of reevaluate, sit down, see where we are, talk kind of as a group, not quite kumbaya, but really functional on what we're doing. A lot of people put in a lot of time, so it's kind of nice to see all those things coming together. And I know we all appreciate Danny. I want to reiterate the communication and everything that's gone back and forth between our Des Moines Waterworks and the Park Foundation, and trying to come up with good things. I think that's really helped foster some of the speed that we've seen in the last year. Being able to have Danny there and make sure that we've got information for decision-making at the point of contact rather than waiting another month or so. And hopefully, everybody is hopeful, we'll get some 2080 agreement with the city of Des Moines. Do we have any news on that, or any thought on?
There's actually 3 agreements. I believe that 2 of them will probably be before you in January. With December being early, we may not make it. The 3rd agreement will be the city of Des Moines underpass agreement, if you will, and I'm not so sure that it will bring it in January. We have a maintenance agreement, 2080, that Ted has been working on with his staff a lot. That's been to Rick, and it's getting through the completion, but there's several steps in order to bring it to you. And then the construction agreement between Des Moines Waterworks and the Park Foundation to build the improvements of Phase 1 will also be coming, what we believe, in January. We tried for December, but I don't think it'll happen. So that's what it looks like.
And it takes a lot of work to make those things happen, and it's been amazing to see those things. The discussion of what was going to happen in the amphitheater area has gotten down to the nitty-gritty on how much concrete we need to make sure that we have emergency access, and also just the practical matter of the way the stage is set up so that you can bring a semi up there and back it in and be able to have your crew load things rather than from a block away, so that promoters never want to come back again after going through the hassle. So they're trying. I think that's going to be a good long-term thing to make sure that they've got that all together. There's been some trade-offs in money and where we are fundraising, but we've got some big asks, Vision Iowa that's still out, and some other things that are still coming in, and we think we can raise the money that we need to. We targeted $9 million. We're probably looking at more like $12 million. We think that the money's out there to have. There are people that have been waiting with money parked for the ask and the finalization. So it's a good position to be in. I'm excited about it.
And may I just spend a second on the 2080s for a minute, because I think it's pretty important that you as a board know how elaborate this process is. The first 2080 you're going to see is for the construction of the improvements, so that's your last opportunity really to look and make sure that you're comfortable with how the master plan is going to move forward in those elements. The second is a pretty important one, given your concerns about using waterworks money, not using waterworks money, essentially to subsidize the operation and maintenance of those improvements once they're done. Ted has been working, and Dan have been working very hard on that, as well as others. And the third is this agreement about the breezeway, the tunnel underneath Fluor Drive. It's very critical to us that the city of Des Moines take responsibility for the maintenance of that tunnel, if you will, not a skill set that we have nor want to have. So there's some really critical pieces in moving this forward. It's not all about fundraising and the success that the foundation has had in fundraising, but now operationalizing that. You've already operationalized the design agreement with RDG. You've approved that, but now there are 3 other 2080s that are really important and unusual, because again, someone is privately raising money, giving improvements to us, that there will be an ongoing responsibility for its maintenance, without wanting to sound too apocalyptic. We want to protect ourselves in the event that something like the Des Moines Waterworks Foundation is not even a term that any board member here is familiar with in 10 years, because they've gone out of existence, and yet we have $9 or $12 million of improvements out here with responsibility. So a lot of work going on to make that happen. It is a great and exciting group of folks we're working with, but obviously staff is working hard to protect your long-term interests and making sure that we're not left with subsidization of an improvement that really is not associated with water production or distribution.
And that is one of the points of emphasis right now, is that we're going to be transitioning, that Sam will not be, in long term, we're going to transition to somebody who's going to be not in a caretaker role, but in an operational role, winding a project up and getting it running is a different task than getting things operating and seeing where we're going to be. So we're in discussions about that, what that job would be, what we want, how that works, so that we won't be in that position. We can make sure, the governance committee, I think, has worked pretty well in trying to make sure that we have new people coming on that are talented and interested and have the right skill sets to make things happen. So we want to maintain that. That's probably the hardest thing to do.
Mark, could you have maybe Michelle email us the most recent, maybe phased approach, what actually happens phase 1, phase 2? Sam had presented at our neighborhood meeting, and there were slides he said he had just received. This was 2 weeks ago, and it was a different look than what the board has seen.
Okay.
And he said that it was just recently updated. So I think it's important, because it has changed a lot, to your point, that we know what is in phase 1, what's in phase 2.
And a lot of that, I think, is just basically the amount of money that it costs to do some of the stuff and where we are.
And that's great.
And that's what, so we can get that.
And another thing, the new chair is Kate Bias. She's been there since the beginning, and I think the board's familiar with her, and she is a vice president R&R. And she's going to, I think, reach out to you, or the group is, and also the new council people. And we've got some work to do on the council to get support for some of these things.
I think they've already met with our new council members, so.
That's good. And they got together this week.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. CEO and general manager comments, anything else, Bill? All right. I believe that is it. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you to all of you for